Well, hey, everybody, welcome to the Seeing Ability podcast, where we're having a conversation about the world of people with disabilities. And that means we're going to be talking to a variety of folks. Sometimes it's an adult who is the person, that kid who grew up with a disability. Sometimes it's parents raising a child with a disability, and a lot of different people that support this community, whether it's folks in healthcare, education, or nonprofits. First of all, I know you got a lot of choices when it comes to where you listen. So thanks for tuning in to Seeing Ability. We're really glad you're here. And I think you're going to enjoy meeting my friend Kathleen, who falls into that parent bucket. Kathleen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, my listeners know we always start off with the fast four, even though we're all in this world of persons with disabilities. We're all just people. So we want to get to know you a little bit. So the fast four is brought to us by my friends at Reliable Tech Help. So if you have tech needs, reach out to them at 502-797-7399. So the first fast four question is, what is your favorite food?
Oh, I've been on the hot spot. I would probably say that anything Italian would probably fall under my favorite food.
There you go. All
Yeah.
right. If we were to look at your playlist, what kind of music would we find on it?
If you looked at Amazon Alexa, you're going to see everything Disney, basically. We listen to Disney music all the time.
Fantastic. All right. And is there a good, you can pick your choice, either a book you've been reading or a show you've been watching that is just your favorite?
Yeah, I'm actually enjoying the Once Upon a Time, which is on Disney Plus. I am watching that, and I guess it's just one of those fun favorite shows to watch, and it's certainly Disney themed. So you'll kind of pick up. I have a lot of Disney in my blood. So
A lot of Disney. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
People that don't know you will definitely,
there
after today, they'll know that.
you go.
Okay. So now, is there a place around the globe that is a bucket list destination that you have yet been to, but you'd like to go to one day?
We have a burning desire and a plan to take my son, who I'll talk about today, but to take him to Italy. So we have friends that live over there. They've invited us to come and stay with them. So we're planning to do that in spring, I believe, of 2025.
I
So,
like the symmetry, how you tied that together. You
oh
started
yeah.
you started with Italian food and then you ended with going to Italy. So
Right. Well, we ironically we met these people through Disney. So yeah,
okay, so it
all
all ties
connected.
together. Well, you mentioned your son, and I guess we'll start off with folks who have never met you. We've had a chance to talk before off camera, but tell us a little bit about your son and kind of how you got into this world. And then after that, I'll probably ask you some questions about the start of your journey.
Into this world. So my son Jacob, he goes by Jake. Jake is 24. We had his diagnosis come about around age 2. At that point, things that we thought we knew about having a toddler completely went out the door, and we experienced being first-time parents as well as having a child with special needs right off the get-go. Jake was born at a 1 pound, 5 ounce weight. He was a 26 weeker. So
Mhm.
being extremely premature, we knew we were going to have some challenges or special needs, if you will, but we had no idea what we were going to encounter when we got the diagnosis of autism. But despite the fact that there was a lot of negative, if you would, PR associated with autism,
Sure.
indeed has not been a death sentence for him. And indeed, it's actually been a great awakening for us to realize that my son has amazing capabilities, and we focus on that rather than his inabilities. So,
Love that. So back in the beginning, when you got that diagnosis, I know when we talked off camera,
yeah.
every parent goes through that kind of acceptance phase where they're realizing that parenting is going to be a little different than they anticipated, and it's different for everybody getting through that. So talk to us a little bit about that part of your journey. And I think intertwined in that, parents have a lot of interaction with the medical system and often have a journey of kind of learning to find their footing and their voice within that as they relate to doctors and diagnoses and things like that. So tell us about those early chapters.
Little bit there. So we're taking a time warp back to 22 years ago. So it
Yep.
was a while back. At that time, the only doctors who were really able to make that diagnosis were either a neurologist or a psychologist.
Mhm.
So we were working with speech therapy to help him. He was, as I said, premature, and so we had him an earlier intervention for speech. And the speech therapist pulled us aside and she said, you know, guys, I really feel like you might want to have him assessed. And we're like, assessed for what? And they said, she said for autism potentially. And we're like, well, no, he's not autistic. He's able to do everything. And she goes, really, it's something that I think you should probably look at and just have a doctor, take a look at him, do an assessment. So reluctantly we did because we're like, well, we don't want to have a diagnosis of autism. That's not what we're looking for.
Right.
But we heeded her advice and we went to go see a neurologist. And the neurologist said while we were meeting with her. Now, meanwhile, my son is banging his head on the wall and he's tantruming and so forth. And she looks and she says, actually, I don't feel like he's autistic. I feel like he's got a lot of language challenges. And so he's probably frustrated. And that's probably what we're seeing. So I went back to the speech therapist. Good news, we didn't get, he's not autistic actually. And she said he is very developmentally challenged or delayed, and his speech delays are what we're seeing. And she said, get another opinion.
Mm.
And so we got a second opinion, and the second opinion said most definitely his behavior would be congruent to this. And she made the determination or diagnosis of autism. So when I went back to see the speech therapist, it was very heavy laden. I was not thrilled about that, obviously. And she said to me, I said, we got the diagnosis of autism as you had expected. And she took my hand and she said, oh, Kathleen, this isn't a death sentence for your son. He is still the same beautiful child that he has always been. There's nothing changed except for now you have doors that have opened because of a diagnosis. She goes, otherwise you would not have these availability to have services that he is now going to be eligible for because of a formal diagnosis. And she said, that's why I pressed for you to go and seek that diagnosis for him. I know he is going to be an amazing kid, and he has so many capabilities, but we need him to get the help he needs. So with that, it was like a light bulb sort of came on for us that, what we're doing is opening doors, not closing them. So I think that was a paradigm shift a little bit. And Jim, I think what I started to experience early on was what I went into manager mom mode. I don't know if that makes any sense to you, but manager mom, what I did is I did everything to make my son's life easier and more pliable and amenable around his needs. Everything that he needed, we got for him. We took care of his issues, so he didn't tantrum. So he didn't have to go through challenges and problems and have difficulty. And it was probably around the time he was about age 6 or 7. I'm in full manager mom mode, that I had read a meme that kind of hit me between the eyes. And the meme essentially said something to the effect of, if you cut it for me, if you clean it for me, if you pick it up for me, if you do it for me, you teach me that you're better at it than I am.
Wow.
And I realized in that moment after reading that was exactly what manager mom was doing. I was disabling my own child. I was giving him every possible easy solution so he didn't have to deal with life's challenges. And I had to shift. I had to shift very quickly to leader mom. And so leader mom essentially is a problem giver, not a problem solver. And I learned how to give my son those challenges, not to disable him and not make him eligible to be able to do those things. And that was a huge, huge paradigm shift that happened. And I think it was a blessing for him and for us as well, because now we have a son who can do many things. Had manager mom remained in charge, that probably wouldn't have been the case. So.
Yeah, there's a lot. Thank you. There's a lot to unpack there. I mean, and the first thing I heard was that whole mind shift. You called it a paradigm shift of like, this is a heavy thing, this diagnosis, this is an ending point. And what a blessing to have that therapist have the perspective to be like, no, it's just kind of how you look at it. And it's really an opportunity. So I'm sure there's a lot of listeners shaking their heads that can really relate to like feeling exactly like you felt, whether it's autism or any kind of diagnosis, that it's just like, oh my gosh, what is it going to mean for my kid? You go down that rabbit hole of worry about the future and what their life is going to be like and everything. But it also, information is power, right? And like you said, opens up doors and opportunities, and now we know at least what path we're on, and we
Mhm.
can face things from there. So what a gift. I hope a lot of people have that experience from a therapist or somebody like that that can give that. And then you talking about the shift. I know that people are listening thinking, manager mom, that's totally me. You
Yep.
know,
I feel convicted at this point.
yeah, there's a
Right?
there's a whole group
Yeah.
of people that are raising their hand and saying, "Yep, you got me, manager mom. I'm doing it all the time." And it's so natural, right? Because you want to, like you said, if a kid is facing challenges and struggles, you don't want to see them upset all the time. So let's just
Oh,
make it easier for them,
yeah.
maybe easier for us at times, but
Mhm.
like we just don't want to have a battle every moment.
Yeah.
But boy, that meme was a gift, right? For you to just be like, oh, that's, again, raise my hand, confess.
Right.
I'm doing, like you said, I'm learning a learned helplessness, an inability to learn through trial and error, through failure, trying to figure out things on my own.
Cause
So
and effect.
yeah,
Yes.
so was that an immediate shift for you, or was it still hard to pull back?
I think that it was a little of both actually. In some ways I was very quick to immediately shift, and it's like learning how to tie your hands behind your back,
Right.
Very easily I could tie his shoes for him and it'd probably be a lot faster, and he's going to have less frustration and anger and issues there. But learning to tie my hands behind my back and saying, keep trying and keep doing it, and forcing the what he didn't want to do, but forcing it was hard. But it was actually one of the best things, especially when he was successful and he was really, really on fire about it. So one of the things I've realized about my son is he's extremely motivated when people are proud of him.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that is the reward, is that he is told, I'm proud of you. And when he achieves that, legitimately achieves the I'm proud of you, it's like gold for him. Yeah.
Mm. It's interesting. I happen to know from our offline conversations that your day job world is kind of in the human resources
Yeah.
spectrum. So I'm sure you draw a lot of parallels with that manager versus leader.
Yeah.
Tell us about those parallels.
Well, I feel like, we're dealing with people,
Right.
regardless of if it's at home or at work. And I've learned that essentially the same principles work when you're talking about helping people bring out their best work.
Yeah.
And with that, it's definitely the principles of human behavior. I'm a behaviorist. That's what I studied in college.
Yeah.
And so the ABA therapy absolutely made a lot of sense to me, and rewarding, and if you would, correcting. So, uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
So looking back, the other thing we talked about, that whole second opinion thing. Again,
Yeah.
what advice would you give to parents who are kind of like on the early part of the journey and they're a little overwhelmed with like navigating what doctors tell them, and maybe even afraid to like question a doctor because they're the
Right.
experts, that kind of thing?
Right. Well, I can only speak from personal experience. So, my advice comes from that lens. We've had excellent doctors on our team and have been very great guides for us. I found that the best doctors, though, are ones that are very open to being asked critical questions,
Yeah.
and are comfortable with being able to, if I don't understand something, you've got to put it in terms that I can, understand. And I'm not a dumb person. I don't have a medical background, but I do understand a lot of the core principles here. So explain it to me again, or let me see if I can explain it to you as I understand it. And the more patient the doctor is with us to be able to do that, it really, really helps to make sure that we're on the same page. I think that's one of the biggest things, is
Mm.
train yourself. If you don't understand something, train yourself to bring that forward, and even to say, let me see if I can repeat this so that I am capturing what you're trying to tell me. There is no shame in doing that. And in fact, that gives the doctor better feedback that what they're trying to explain actually makes some sense to you. If you're able to repeat it, it means that you understand it, at least to some degree. So that's a big part. I feel that when we've had those rare encounters of a doctor who really didn't uh, operate with the level that we would like. We've had to put into the mode of, wait a minute, this isn't exactly making sense to us. And I feel like you need to explain this more. Jim, I think I was sharing with you, and if you don't mind, this might be a time to bring that example forward. But my son, when he was about 10, had started developing seizures, and we'd never experienced seizures before.
Right.
Nobody in our family had it, and so we were this is new territory for us. And we had initially been given the name of a pediatric neurologist here in town to go consult with. And so we went, made the appointment. We're sitting there in the, if you will, the examination room. Our hands are wringing. We're just waiting for the doctor to kind of help us.
Sure.
And the doctor came in, and I kid you not, he had his iPad in his hand, and he's looking at the iPad the entire time as he introduces himself as Dr. whatever his name was. And then he said, Mr. and Mrs. Lapicus, I want you to know that, your son's condition is one called epilepsy. Here's what it is. And this is the recommended treatment. I'm going to recommend that we do a course of this particular medication. So I wanted to inform you of all of the side effects, including damage to his kidneys and liver. And we're going to have to do blood tests. And my husband looked at him and he said, excuse me, doctor, what did you say your name was?
Right.
And he said, well, my name is Dr. Da da da. And he said, Dr. Da da da. He said, this is my son, Jacob. And he said, how do you know actually what is going on with him? And he started to stammer a little bit. He says, well, based on the test results that we got in the hospital. And he goes, no. He said, you haven't even touched my son. You haven't examined him. You haven't asked us any questions. How do you know truly what is going on? What is the best recommendation for him? And so the doctor wasn't really able to answer that. And my husband and I said, I think we need to go consult another doctor. So we drove 3 hours to St. Louis and consulted a pediatric neurologist out of Barnes Jewish Hospital. And she spent an hour just meeting with us and examining my son before she even talked about any kind of treatment. And medication was one of the options, but it wasn't the only. So it is a huge lesson to learn that just because you have a doctor that's there doesn't necessarily mean that's the right doctor for you and for your son or child. So pay attention to those things. I've always said, if you don't like the doctor, you're not going to like them anymore when you need them. You need to be able to work with them. So it's an important part of that relationship. It's going to be a long-term thing we're going to deal with. So we need to be able to be on the same page with the doctor and know they're listening to us. They're asking us questions and they're letting us ask questions. That's my.
What a powerful story. And unfortunately, I'm sure there's people listening who had similar experiences, but didn't necessarily go somewhere else, just kind of let them be pushed through because that's what you do, right? You don't question the person in the white coat because they're the expert, and like you said, a lot of them are wonderful and you've been blessed to have wonderful ones. But that example, that story is a really good one of like, when it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't right.
Right. There was something like a spidey sense that was going off, going, this doesn't feel like he's really got our best interest. He was kind of interested in, moving along with, here's another patient. I felt like it.
Right. And he was probably well-intended and, but that's his thing, but it wasn't your thing. And the idea that you have the power and that you're in charge, you're kind of the coordinator of the healthcare of your kid, and you get to choose who's on the team is a really important lesson that I think most parents I talk to, they don't get that immediately. It takes them a little while to figure that out. Most parents will say, yeah, how we interact with the medical community now is different than we first started out. We didn't know that was an option. So
it goes back to that leadership paradigm we were talking about, leading the decision-making with what's best course for my son. From therapy to medical to any kind of development needs, those kind of things. We're leading the decisions, not just taking the recommendations of somebody else and following.
And that partnership is so key.
It is.
All right, well, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. When you have a kid who is different, all your ducks need to be in a row, especially your money. Cam Howell with Primerica knows the joys and challenges as he and his wife raise their medically fragile son, Brooks. Cam brings over 13 years of experience to his clients, helping his clients to be protected, have a plan for the future, reduce debt, and connect to resources. Get your financial house in order so that you can enjoy every moment with your child. Reach out today at 502-803-5075. And now back to the show. All right, Kathleen, let's talk a little bit about part of this journey is how the rest of the world interacts with you and your family when you're traveling it with a kid who's different. And I
Sure.
think so often the first thing that comes to mind is stares and questions and kind of the negative side of that. And you may have insights you've gained with navigating that piece. But I know offline we talked about the other side of a story you had of like how sometimes people will surprise us not with how rude they are and sensitive, but how amazingly caring they are. So both of those sides of the coin, tell us about that part of the journey for your family.
Um, well, I don't feel that we've had a lot of the negative associated with our son's challenges with autism. I feel like the education has come a long way
Yeah.
in the 22-year span that we've had. I feel like the early challenges we actually had were more with our family members, strangely enough, rather than the general public.
Yeah.
In terms of voicing their opinions on things or their suggestions, all well intended and well meaning. They really didn't have perhaps any knowledge or credibility to bring about, here's what you should do. In fact, it was really hard, I think, early on when we were trying to learn how to potty train for my son. My son didn't actually successfully manage completing that challenge until he was about 7, which isn't uncommon. And but it was very frustrating and hard for us when we would have neurotypical parents or parents of neurotypical children, I mean, who would offer their heartfelt suggestions of, you should try doing this, or, why haven't you done this? And it felt almost as if they were trying to, it felt very critical rather than actually helpful. So we did experience that early on, and our best defense was essentially, look, thank you for that. I appreciate that's a really interesting point. We will try that and see how it works, and basically go from there, because it wouldn't do any good to say, well, that doesn't work, and we've tried that, and to get argument. Their heart is in the right place. It's just that from the credibility of, you haven't walked in my shoes, it's hard to receive advice.
Yeah.
Unless it's been seasoned by your own experience on that.
That's a gracious choice of response. So I like, folks hearing.
And then honestly, we've had more positive experiences in the public with my son than negative. And so as I had mentioned earlier, we love Disney, and we've started actually taking Jake to Disney at age 5. And so he's 24. We've been to Disney a lot, and I've lots and lots of great stories. One story that I think I was sharing with you, it really impacted us, as funny as it is that Jake was about age 12. Now, Jake is very small for his age, so he probably at about that time looked about 7 or 8 in terms of his height and his weight and just in general. And so, and he was totally into Disney Pixar Cars, if you will.
Okay.
That was the stage. It was Cars 2 had just been released and so forth. At age 12, he was totally into it. And so my husband and I were interested when we were taking him to Disney to see if we could find one of those button-down party shirts that had Cars characters on it. That would be kind of a fun souvenir. And we looked throughout the entire trip and couldn't find a single one that had anything like that. And we were kind of just sad, but that was on our last day of our trip, and we had gone to Magic Kingdom. We were riding around on the train. We stopped at the Main Street station to get off. And I happened to notice a couple that was right in front of us. Was a little bit older couple, older than us, and they didn't have any kids. So the man in the couple, he was wearing a button-down Cars 2 party shirt. I was like, oh my gosh, there's one right there. There's one right there. My husband nudged me. Well, go ask him. He always puts me on that side to have to go and ask. So I interrupted him. I said, guys, hey, wanted to see if I could ask just a really quick question. And as I'm starting to talk to them to ask them where did they find the shirt, my son latched onto this man's arm and just kind of held on to the guy's arm. And the guy was kind of patting my son's hand. He looked down at him, and I said, oh, sir, I'm so sorry. I said, my son's autistic. And I said, I don't mean it. And he goes, no, he's fine, really. And he's just patting my son's hand. And I said, I just wanted to ask where you guys found that beautiful shirt that you're wearing here, this button-down party shirt. We've been looking all around and can't seem to find one. Where did you guys find that? And he looked at me as he looked down at my son. He says, well, he said, as far as the shirt goes, you'll have to ask the War Department. And then he pointed to his wife, who paraleys the department. And so I turned to her, and meanwhile, my son's not letting go of this man. And so I asked her, and she said, we found it on Disney, shopdisney.com. Oh, okay, you guys found it online. Yeah, we found it a couple weeks ago. I'm sure it's still there. So I thanked him, and guys, thank you so much. And I'm trying to pull my son apart from this man. And so finally I'm like, honey, we got to let him go. Thank you so much. And he's waving to them and so forth. The man was very touched by this, apparently. And so we were following them down the ramp as we're leaving the train station. And the man and his wife, they stopped at the bottom of the ramp. We're following down behind. And he turned around and he looked at us and he says, so he really loves Pixar cars. And we're like, yeah, more than anything right now, that's his jam. And he said, well, I'll tell you what. And he started unbuttoning his shirt. He said, I want him to have this shirt. And he had an undershirt underneath. It wasn't like he was going. But we're like, sir, we can't take the shirt off your back. That wasn't our intent. And he said, please honor me. Please do this for him because he is a great kid. And he says, I don't meet many people that are as great as him. And he goes, I know it's probably a small thing, but it's a big thing to me if you would do this. And we were speechless. We didn't really know what to say. And he handed it to, he goes, now it's going to have to be washed because I've only worn it once, but I want him to enjoy this. And they left. And I never even thought to go, well, can we get you some money? Can we get your contact? There was no,
Right.
It didn't even cross our minds that we were so stunned that somebody would actually literally take the shirt off his back to hand it to my kid, who, bless him, he has taken, that shirt has been so special to him. He wears it every time we go to church. It is his church going shirt. And I think about the fact that we never got this man's name. We never got a chance to get to know him, but he's a person we will never forget.
Yeah.
Right. And to experience that kind of kindness coming out of a perfect stranger, because my son was different, not because he was a cute kid. I mean, he certainly is a cute kid.
Right.
But there was just something that connected for him. And he felt this was a way of kindness to my son, who all he really cared about was, here's a human being that actually likes cars too, Yeah. So I just feel like there's so many examples. I could tell you stories upon stories of that.
Sure.
Where we go and people are genuinely just very kind, very patient. And we've trained ourselves to thank people, not apologize. So I think that we apologize way too much in our society for things that don't warrant an apology, like, sorry, Mr. Call. No, you're not. You're sorry, Mr. Call. You're glad I called, but we apologize way too much. So I've trained ourselves to not apologize for my son, not apologize for his differences or his presence, but actually to say thank you. Thank you for being so patient. Thanks for holding the door. Thanks for showing us what kindness looks like. Yeah. And in doing so, I think that's really changed our spirit of looking at the world with that lens of looking for kindness is so much easier. And it's actually quite a bit around us if we're training ourselves to look for that and to thank people rather than trying to excuse ourselves from a world that would expect us to be anything but we are.
Yeah, I love that. And how helpful is that for younger parents of younger kids who maybe are a little worried about what the future is going to be like, to hear a story like that of like, there's so much good in people. So I love that story the first time you heard it, and you just told it to me again, and I felt like it was the first time I heard it because it's powerful. So
yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about Jake. I happen to know that he's a bit of a joke teller, is he not?
Yes, I have a Facebook page. Jake doesn't have Facebook, but he has several joke books, and he likes to pull a joke out of the joke book and say, hey, Mom, will you post this for me? So I pair that up with a picture of Jake. I don't know which is cuter, either the picture or the joke, but they go hand in hand. And so he gets quite a bit of notoriety. People are like, I love Jake's jokes, and it's really a nice way to showcase his personality.
Yeah,
in a very fun way. Yeah, they're clean dad jokes, by the way.
Yeah, no, I've seen a lot of them since getting to meet you.
Yeah,
and they're pretty funny. When you think about when you're first starting out and a child has any kind of challenge, you're focused obviously on the challenges ahead, but you don't realize the unanticipated gifts you're going to get along this journey. And I think we had a chance to talk earlier about you just kind of having some insights you've gained on kind of the way Jake sees the world and what
Mm.
that's taught you a little bit and maybe the message to others. So tell me a little bit about Jake's perspective.
Well, as I said, Jake is 24 and Jake has been in the public school probably until he was about 12. And then we actually pulled him and did homeschooling as well as through ABA. We got some therapy in that. And it was about that time, 12, 13 years old, that he had received a new coach in his ABA. Who he was very excited about. His name was Brandon. And so as I'm walking around the block with Jake, talking a little bit about his new coach, tell me a little bit about Brandon. And I said, so is Brandon old like me? And he said, no, he's young. And I said, oh, okay. Is he really tall? And he said, yes. And I said, is he white? Is he black? Is he, Asian? And my son looked at me like I had three heads. He goes, what do you mean? And I said, I'm just curious, I guess, what's his race? And my son absolutely did not understand this question. He had no concept of race. He had no idea. He goes, he's a great guy. He doesn't see the person's skin color or their race as any way to describe a person.
Right.
It absolutely doesn't even reach a level of comprehension for him. And I had to sit back and realize that is probably the most powerful gift that my son has, is absolute. He looks at a person through the lens of the quality of their personality, of their kindness, of their demeanor and so forth. That's how he judges a person. And
Right.
so often we kind of categorize people based on outward appearances and things. And that's what I was asking about, because that helps me to kind of visualize him. But Jake had no idea what I was talking about when I asked him about his race. And I realized that's not an important quality to Jake. It doesn't matter to him.
Right.
He's a great person. And so he wasn't upset. He was confused by it. So I had to circle around and ask different questions that would help me to understand Brandon and so forth. And his
Yeah.
laugh and the things that Jake really admired about him and those kind of things. He was able to really describe that, but not this whole thing about his outward appearance. So
Yeah,
it
it's
was
interesting.
really powerful.
I've talked to so many parents with similar stories where there's different aspects of the way their kid sees the world around them that you kind of stop and wonder, who is it that actually has the disability, them or
Yeah.
us?
Yeah.
Kind of the world would be a better place if we saw the world in a way that many kids with a different lens see it. So thank you for
Absolutely.
sharing that. So I could talk to you for hours. I think our folks could probably listen, but we are winding down just
Sure.
to keep our episodes tight.
Mhm.
I always like to kind of wrap up with my guests to kind of say, and this is very oversimplified. There's so many things we could talk about, but if you were brought in, say, to a children's hospital, and they said, "Oh, we've got Kathleen here. She has an adult son who's autistic, and she wants to give some advice for young parents on raising a kid with any kind of difference. It doesn't have to be a crowd of just
Right.
kids with autism." And you had to boil it down to like 3 or 4 keys to success. What would you tell those parents?
Okay. Well, I'm going to just talk off the top of my head. I feel like the first thing that I would tell them is that, and I'm sure you've probably heard this cliche, but it absolutely resonates. And that is that every popcorn kernel pops at different times. It doesn't mean they're not going to pop. Okay. And
Love
we
that.
may be prone to try to compare our children and what is considered normal development, or what's considered what people would normally expect, and somehow use that as our litmus to see if he is progressing or not. And I feel like the advice I would give people is let them pop at their own time and allow for the patience that they need, because they will pick up everything that you're looking to try to teach them. If you work with them, they'll pick it up. It just might take longer than what would be considered normal. And that's okay. So as I referenced, my son was 7. At the time when he did potty train, it was an overnight. There was no accidents after that particular, like this light bulb went on and we've never had any issues. Whereas a lot of people experience bedwetting over time and then it gets better and better. We didn't have any of that. It just stopped. So sometimes the popcorn, kernel just pops differently, and that's okay. And I think that would be one of the biggest takeaways I would offer.
Yeah.
And I think secondly, I think is just knowing that you can be the advocate for your kid, and you can be their coach, and you can be their leader, all of those things, and expect that the world is gonna be better. It does get better over time. It gets easier. Be careful not to judge yourself too harshly.
Yeah.
You put your standards into check. One of the things that we do when we look at how successful our Disney trip was, how well did Jake handle the crowds this time? How many times did he get upset? Because we're seeing that it's getting easier and easier. That is actually our best gauge if we had a better trip or not. Did other children, I mean, we call it the witching hour, which happens between about 3 to 5 at Disney. Kids started getting crabby and hot and they're overstimmed. So they start to kind of act out, and then the parents respond to that. So how well did he handle that?
Yeah.
We're learning a life skill of learn to ignore other people's behavior. How well did he do that? So put those kind of expectations forward.
Yeah. And I love the not being too hard on yourself as a parent, because I'm sure most of our listeners are. Well, Kathleen, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your story with our audience. Thank you guys for listening. We would love your help to make sure other parents who could really benefit from this podcast know that it's around. That's kind of my goal. The goals for this podcast are always educating people, getting a little inspiration and motivation. I was inspired listening to Kathleen today.
Thank you.
And then creating that sense of community. It can be isolating and lonely out there as a parent on this path. So we want listeners to tune in because they want this to be another part of their village. So please go to our Facebook page, go to seeingability.com. It'll take you to the Facebook page, like the page, follow it, like this particular episode when it gets posted, and share it with others. If you're part of a parent group or things like that, let them know the podcast exists. Kathleen, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next time.